I brought in two people to help me. We signed a partnership agreement, and we were all going to do it together. And they took the company off me. They booted me out of the Facebook page. After the trial, I was celebrating because the trial was over. We could celebrate now. And 2 weeks later, I was in hospital, having gone on a huge binge. And this was before I knew that I was an alcoholic. The police officers who were not letting me run to the petrol station to get another bottle of vodka. I haven't had therapy, but an AA meeting is, for me, therapy, and I still go to them now. And when I sat in that first AA meeting...
Hi, Alex. Welcome to the Never Fully Heard podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Hi, Nick. No, thanks for having me. Thanks very much.
Where I want to start the podcast is, why did you get the nickname Spike at university?
Gosh, that takes me back. It was from the character in the Hugh Grant film, Notting Hill, because in my first year at Oxford Brookes, I would always come out of my room in the morning with I had bleached blonde hair back then. I always used to come out with a cigarette in one hand and coffee in the other. My hair was all messed up, and I had this silly dressing gown, and it looked exactly like the character from Notting Hill. So yeah, the nickname Spike quickly stuck, and it's only my friends from that time now that still call me. But you've done your research. That's a throwback. I did.
I love it. And to help give, I guess, some context to the conversation, what social media page did you start, and what impact did that have in the following years?
So in 2010, when I was at Oxford Brookes, I started UNILAD, and then 2 years later, I started the LadBible. That's what it was called back then. It was before the was dropped. And yeah, no, I didn't really know at the time that. I mean, I had no expectation that they would grow into these huge global, beasts that they are today. And yeah, it certainly took me on some interesting journeys. The LadBible is quite a short story, because I created LadBible. I had it for about a year and a half, and then I let it go. So that was all relatively nice. UNILAD came with some fairly up and down moments, which ultimately led me to some pretty horrendous places, sort of mentally. But yeah, I started it in 2010 at university off the back of a breakup. Interestingly, I was dating a girl, and she ran the student magazine, and we ended up breaking up. And I thought, and I wasn't my choice. I really liked her. I was heartbroken, and I wanted to do something to try and impress her and to win her back. So I thought, I don't want to step on her toes and compete with her, but I'll launch something that's kind of similar to hers. A magazine aimed at students on the internet. And so I was at university. I knew it wanted to be directed at men. Hers was directed at women. I didn't want to annoy her too much. So yeah, UNILAD, the name came quite quickly. And yeah, it grew really fast. I think within the first 6 months, we had, 50,000 followers on the Facebook page. I mean, it was just the Facebook page back then. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it didn't impress in the way that I was hoping.
Did you have a conversation with her about it?
Yeah, I did. I remember I went to the local park. She had a dog at the time, and we always used to walk the dog I can't remember the name of the park in Oxford now, but we went for a walk, and I was telling her all about it. She agreed to go for a walk, and I said, I've started this thing. Look, it's got 500 followers at the time. Kind of hoping she would go, oh, that's cool. Maybe we should, we've got something in common now. But no, she didn't really say much. But I have spoken to her a lot recently, which is really nice, and I think she is impressed now. But yeah, the romantic ship has sailed, I think.
Unfortunately, so just because from my research, I heard one of the stories you did, the safe sex campaign. Do you mind just telling that, because I think it's a great story.
Yeah, sure. That's an interesting time. So I was thinking of ways to grow the Facebook page. And so I thought I'll launch a campaign. The idea was simple. Anyone who liked the page, I would send them a free condom in the post. So I changed the profile picture to basically a big poster saying, like the page, get a free condom. I think I anticipated maybe 200 to 300 people would get on board with it. So I went to the sexual health clinic. I got a small amount of condoms. But no, it blew up. Like I think I got about 2,000 to 3,000 people. I mean, that was kind of viral in those days, and that was the first experience I had of any kind of viral, something just going way above and beyond what I was expecting it to do. So yeah, I sheepishly went back to the sexual health clinic and told them about the campaign. I think that my first trip, I think they just thought I was some kind of maverick asking for 300 condoms. I didn't go into detail, but now I had to. I'm doing this thing on Facebook. 3,000 people have got on board with it. Help. But they were amazing. They were so nice. They actually really liked the idea. And they gave me these 2 huge industrial sized boxes of condoms, which was brilliant. I ended up walking home with these 2 huge boxes with condoms in capital letters written across them. So I think if anyone saw me, they probably thought I fancied my chances or something. But yeah, no, it was brilliant. I ended up, it actually cost me quite a lot of money because I ended up spending all the sort of savings I had on stamps and envelopes. That was kind of like an unforeseen consequence of the success of the campaign, I guess. I can't remember, a couple of hundred, 200-300 quid I had to spend on stamps and envelopes. But yeah, a lot of people, like I said, that was my first kind of experience of something reaching outside the initial community. That was my first kind of taste of virality.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good tactic, and it's often like I was listening to the podcast with the founder of Bumble, and she was just speaking about all the different tactics. I think because a lot of companies are born out of quite genius marketing ideas around university campuses, like the dating apps, like Monzo. I know did a really good job of handing out the cards, and just shows when you haven't got like that much money and you've got to come up with a way to kind of make some more money or kind of do something, you can really come up with some creativity. But just going back to the point you mentioned before, that it kind of got you into a bit of a bad state. What happened? I guess what happened with UNILAD that caused you to, I guess, feel the stress and kind of mental angst that you mentioned?
It was probably fast forwarding to 2013. I was all okay up until that point. I brought in 2 people to help me. We signed a partnership agreement, and we were all going to do it together. And they took the company off me. They booted me out of the Facebook page, and that was really the start of a 3 to 4 year legal fight to get it back. And that, looking back, was a massive trigger and a turning point to my mental health. I mean, as far as I was aware, I didn't really have any issues with it. I wasn't drinking really at all. I didn't really experience any anxiety. I didn't really have anything negative going on with my mental health. And then I didn't really realize that I did at the time that I got kicked out of the Facebook page of the company. It wasn't until I was a little bit into the legal process that people started noticing that I was drinking a lot. I was drinking a huge amount, but I was getting by. I was functioning and I was doing everything okay. I wasn't aware that I had an anxiety issue, and I wasn't aware that I was running away from something. I mean, now I can look back at the whole legal process, and I'm amazed that I made it out the other side. The financial pressure of it was, just to start, was huge. And when they've got, when you're told by so many people from different angles, from people close to you perhaps, or from lawyers on other sides that you're in the wrong and you're fighting a lost cause, but you're still pushing forward with it. It really was like a David versus Goliath story. And even though that was because they had huge amounts of, public and money behind them, and at that stage it was just me really. And yeah, the drink and the drugs were really taking hold at that stage. But it's interesting because I was active on Facebook and doing all this online posting about it at the time, and I was putting on this front of, I'm bulletproof and none of this affects me, because I didn't want anyone to know that it was really getting to me, and I didn't actually think it was. I thought that I was just, of course I'm going to be drinking a bit because I'm in the middle of a massive court case that is probably going to end up in the high courts in London, and I'm either going to win and get my company back, or I'm going to lose and go bankrupt because I'm going to have to pay for all their costs. That really was the tipping point. It wasn't until I was probably on the witness box in the trial in London that it tipped over. I was aware of anxiety before. It was weird because my parents came up to the trial, and a lot of people thought that they were there to support. My mum was there. The only reason my mum came to the trial was to stop me from going to the petrol station next to the courthouse to buy a bottle of vodka. That was literally her role, was to stop me from going and getting pissed during the trial. But no one knew that. In fact, I've never told anyone that before. She was just there, sat in the courtroom, being a supportive mum. But no, she was there to stop me from going to get a bottle of vodka and getting pissed. And I didn't drink throughout the whole trial. I did have I remember standing on the witness box and being cross-examined by their lawyers and having a big, scary judge, overlooking the whole process. And I thought I was coping okay. And then I just felt this anxiety bubbling up inside me. And I remember feeling a panic attack coming on. And I remember asking the judge, Your Honor, can I have 10 minutes break? He said, yes. I went outside, went into the toilet, and I threw up. And I think it took me about half an hour to walk out of the loo and carry on the process. But again, this was all kind of like secret. My mum kind of knew, but as soon as I came out of the loo and I went back onto the witness box, and whenever I speak about this before, I'm always like gun ho. There was this wasn't getting to me in any way, shape, or form. But the reality was very different, and I feel comfortable now speaking about it. Now I'm out the other side. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Immense pressure throughout that period. I kind of want to go into a few different bits, but for the people that I guess have experienced this in different ways, where they've had a business partner betray them, what was that feeling like when you realized you were locked out that page? What were some of the feelings and thoughts that you were kind of experiencing at that point?
Well, I'd never experienced anything like that before. I just blindly trusted people before, and I was very naive and open to getting taken advantage. I think it's stayed with me, and I think it has changed me probably forever. I'm very anxious and paranoid now. I would never do anything in business with anyone again, or if I did, it would have to go through 20 lawyers. Ridiculous. No one would want to work with anyone who's that paranoid. So I have to accept that I just can't do anything with anyone else, because I fell for it. I fell for believing that the relationship was good, and it's really had a knock-on effect with every other area of my life. I think I've definitely just generally got a fear of people now, and it's a really interesting point of just fast forwarding a second into what do all alcoholics have in common, and it's a fear of people, and that event, when I got booted out of the company, the Facebook page, I look back and that 100% triggered this fear of people, which then triggered this alcoholism. It might have been dormant in me, you know, ready to come out, just waiting for a catalyst, and that was it. I don't know. I don't know if you're born an alcoholic or if events turn you into one. I have no idea, or a combination of both. But looking back, it's so clear that event has completely made me unable to trust another human being. It's had a knock-on effect with my relationships. As I said, I'm not able to work with anyone in a professional capacity. So yeah, it's definitely stuck with me.
Yeah, it must be so tough. And have you had any therapy around the trust element in terms of like ongoing relationships? And I mean, I guess even with family, even though I'm sure that you love certain family members, I can imagine it still being like going through every element of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think family, my immediate family, they've kind of got a bubble around them, and the trust is there with them, just because they've seen things that no one else has seen. Like when I got paralytic this was just after the trial, and this goes back to the alcoholism. After the trial, I was celebrating because the trial was over. We could celebrate now. And 2 weeks later, I was in hospital, having gone on a huge binge. And this was before I knew that I was an alcoholic. I just thought I was drinking to celebrate. But going back to your question, yeah, they've seen all that. And in fact, very few people, they're the only people who have seen that, apart from the police officers who were not letting me run to the petrol station to get another bottle of vodka. I remember they were holding me to the floor, and I remember looking up and seeing my parents look down and they were just sad, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to help me. But they've seen all that. No one else has seen all that. I've never spoken about that before. So the trust is there with them. Absolutely.
And was that moment in the police car like an inflection point? Was that a rock bottom moment where you thought this is something I need to get addressed, or were you not, as you said, cognizant of the fact that this was a real problem at that point?
That was my, at the time, that was my rock bottom. I remember, I mean, it started with, after the trial, I went to Las Vegas, which was the terrible idea. I mean, I didn't know I was an alcoholic at the time. So my mum thought I was drinking because I was stressed about the trial. So when the trial was over, she thought, okay, that went well. Now he's safe. He can go to Las Vegas with his girlfriend. It was an absolute chaotic time. Like I remember waking up, setting my alarm to vibrate at 7 a.m. so I could go down to the bar in Caesar's Palace. My girlfriend, I left her asleep, and have 5 shots of vodka. We ended up breaking up. She didn't want to be an alcoholic. We flew back, sat way apart on the plane. And then losing her at the time just compounded what I was going through. And then I went on a 3-day binge in my hometown, and that put me in hospital. I don't remember, but someone called an ambulance for me, and I was taken to the A&E department, and I was put in a ward. And then I remember kind of just being sober enough to get up and try and run to the petrol station next to the hospital. And I remember the police officer, who was kind of watching me because they knew that I was probably going to go and try and leave, pulled, or not rugby tackled me, but kind of just restrained me and stopped me. And I remember because I was kind of sober at this point, but I remember the desperation. All I wanted was another drink. I think it was a bottle of wine at the time. And seeing my parents look at me with just the sadness in their eyes, that was the moment that we knew that this was more than just drinking because I was stressed because of the court case. And that's the moment. Luckily, my family know a couple of people who are in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they put me in touch with them. And I went to my first AA meeting in February 2017, about 2 weeks after I got back from Las Vegas. And going back to your question about have I ever had therapy? No, I haven't had therapy, but an AA meeting is for me therapy, and I still go to them now. And when I sat in that first AA meeting and I listened to people sharing their stories, that was the moment I was like, shit, I'm an alcoholic. Like, this is, every one of your stories is me. Yeah, and I've had one drink since then. One really bad binge since then. I didn't drink for about 2 years. Alcoholism is a really weird one because you can go for long periods of sobriety, and then you can think, oh, I've done 2 years, I'm cured. I'm going to go and do some research and see if I'm still an alcoholic. I'm going to go and have a drink. It never ends well. I remember I went to a big social media content conference in the Excel in London. Did my talk, did my keynote. It went okay, and then I went to the bar. Load of influencers. It was really fun. Had a few shots, had a few drinks, and it was the start of a 3-day bender again. And I remember just about getting the train back to Eastbourne, where my hometown is, and I sent my parents a text message. I remember we have a family WhatsApp chat, and I sent, "I'm sorry, I've had a drink," and they all rushed around to my flat. I was absolutely paralytic. They were terrified because I was having this withdrawal, palpitations, tremor, shaking, and they took. I don't really remember loads of it. So this is basically just a recollection of what they've told me. But I was put on a ward again, given the anti-tremors medication, and again, that was probably like my second rock bottom, and it's been all okay since.
Well, I'm glad it's been okay since, and congrats on the sobriety and the work on AA. Just a question about alcoholism. Is it a feeling of like loss of control over drinking? Is it kind of an overwhelming feeling? I guess I haven't experienced it, but I'm just curious if you could describe it, how you've experienced it.
You're okay unless you have your first drink. There's a famous saying that the first drink does the damage, and it's so true. Like, I do think about alcohol occasionally. I find it quite easy to not have a drink, but if I give in to that first drink, then it's just an obsession of the mind takes over, and it is hard to explain it to someone who isn't an alcoholic, because someone who isn't an alcoholic could just say, well, just have 2 or 3 drinks and go home and go to bed. If I have a drink, I cannot stop myself from drinking a bottle of vodka, and then there's a high chance it might lead on to something else. Like, I never know now, if I have a drink, if I'm going to be alive in 3 days' time. You lose all control. You lose. There's absolutely no moderation.
And how did your family? You mentioned your mum there. Were you close with your dad during this time, and were you able to open up to him about this?
Yeah, he was hugely supportive during the whole legal process. Massively supportive. I mean, there's no alcoholism in my immediate family, so they didn't really understand. All they could do, and what they did do, I think successfully, was push me on to their friends who had been in AA for many, many years and have had, I think, between them about 80 years of sobriety. They didn't know what to do. They didn't notice that it was alcoholism at first. I mean, an alcoholic would have looked at me probably throughout the whole legal process and said, you're an alcoholic. Like, when you have a drink, you can't stop drinking until you're in the gutter, and you can't stop drinking until you're in hospital. Like, that's obviously not normal drinking behavior. Yeah, they both were hugely supportive, but I mean, they know a lot about alcoholism now. With their son being one, they've definitely had to learn quite quickly, and it is always a worry, I think, for them, because I was sober for 2 years, and then I had another big drink, but I think they know that I've got a handle on it now. The fear is what keeps me sober. I think that's the same with a lot of alcoholics, the fear of actually not knowing how any drinking session is going to end. There are some people who have been sober for many years and they've had a drink and they've jumped out of a building, or they've hung themselves. Like the underlying feelings are really, really strong. And once you have a drink, a lot of alcoholics then go on to other substances in the binge. And I don't want to tell other people's story, but it often leads to horrendous outcomes. And that creates, for me anyway, a lot of fear, because I know that if I have a drink, I lose all control. And it's everything that I do now is based on me not having a drink. Like all of my paid, all my work, all my personal branding stuff that I'm doing, everything with my family, everything with my girlfriend, my dog, looking after my flat, absolutely everything will fall apart if I have a drink. And for me, that's a huge force to not have one.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling the story, because I think it's just so important to raise awareness for, I guess, what alcoholism is and the impact it can have, and just hearing other, I guess, men speak so openly about the impact that it's had on their life, and knowing that, yeah, just as other people out there have experienced it, and they are kind of life does go on if you can address it and get support from the people around you. What were some of the other coping mechanisms you put in place to not be tempted or to stay away from alcohol?
I mean, for me, like the structure of Alcohol Anonymous doesn't work for everybody. I mean, for me, it does work really well, I find. The reason it works for me is when you go to a meeting, you hear other people tell their stories of being an alcoholic. And that, for me, acts as a reminder of what I was like when I had my last drink. And so it's when I've stopped going to AA in the past, you kind of get disconnected from that memory of what actually happened when you had your last drink. And when that happens, the fear gets smaller, and then that voice starts creeping in saying, oh, maybe you're cured, maybe you can drink like a normal person now, maybe you can you can drink in moderation. And that's really dangerous, and that's what gets a lot of alcoholics. And then they think that they can drink, they go to a bar, have a few drinks, and they spiral, and their life falls apart. So for me, AA is a huge one. There's not really anything else that I could think of. I mean, I try and keep myself as active as possible. I find that just trying to do as many things that make me feel confident really helps. I know that's a lot easier said than done. I try and go to the gym as often as I can. I actually really enjoy running, and when I finish a good run, that really makes me feel amazing. But again, it's easy to spiral, and when you do get into a bad place, going to the gym is bloody hard. So it's really naive of me to say, "Oh, go to the gym, go for a run, you'll feel better, and it helps with depression." That's ridiculous. For me, it does sometimes, but I can understand if you are in a dark place. Actually, just leaving the house is impossible. So I wouldn't give that as advice to anyone. I mean, luckily the AA meetings are virtual now, so I don't need to leave my flat. I enjoyed the face-to-face meetings, but I can do them from my computer now at home. I think, again, it's just really staying connected with that, with the memory of what would happen if I had a drink, like what I would do to my family, what I would do to potentially my work life, my relationship. I've got a new girlfriend now who I love very much, and there's just so much at risk if I have a drink, and I just really try and stay grounded and connected to that memory and that thought of, if I go to Co-op and buy a bottle of wine, it won't be okay, and actually probably my life will fall apart.
No, thank you for sharing. That's Yeah, that is really powerful, because I can imagine that being just quite scary, not if knowing what the outcome might be or not knowing what the outcome might be. I can imagine that being a kind of a scary burden, I guess, to have in your mind at times. I just want to kind of take it back to when you first started feeling the level of anxiety build throughout the trial. And you said if a few times that you didn't want anyone to know that you were feeling like this, that this pressure was building. And I wonder, what was it that you didn't want people? Was it like you didn't want people to think you were weak in terms of like the legal consequences, or did you just not want people to see you as crumbling under the pressure? What was the feeling there?
Sure, there was probably definitely an element of not wanting to appear weak in front of my legal opponents. I mean, I think that's, strategically probably just a bad idea. But that wasn't my primary reason. I've just never, ever wanted to appear weak. And I know that's ridiculous, but I suppose up until that moment when I got kicked out of the company and that was probably the point where I started on the journey of anxiety and being fearful and drinking. I never really had any issues that would present me as being weak. So it's really interesting. I think it might have just been habit. I've never been brought up to think that being weak is bad. Maybe it's just various outside factors that told me that it's not right and it's not proper for a man to talk about various things and to show vulnerabilities. I mean, this was back in 2015, 16, really, that I probably started to show signs of mental health issues. And it's brilliant. Now it's so spoken about, and there's absolutely no shame whatsoever, which is fantastic. I mean, I'm not so sure it was the same back then, or I didn't know anything about it. So I was it wasn't a choice not to say anything. I just didn't think it was anything to talk about. I just thought, oh, this is happening. I'm feeling like this. Oh, that was a panic attack, but okay. I'll just have a drink and that will make it go away. Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's definitely a lot of the idea of being. It's always a bit of a nightmare for me, thinking about, because that was the moment when I was on the witness box, and I remember sweating and I remember feeling the anxiety attack coming on, and I was there in front of my opponents, the judge, all of the barristers, my parents, and that was the first time that I remember feeling I have to hide this because no one knows about this, and I have to get out of the situation as fast as possible. And maybe I should have just said, oh, I'm having an anxiety attack. Can we break for 5 minutes? I didn't. I just asked for a break and went to the loo and threw up. I don't know which is the right decision and what was the right thing to do.
I guess even with your friends, were you able at the time or now to go to your like close friends, whether it's guys or girls, and goes, this pressure is overwhelming. Like I'm just anxious there. I'm overthinking everything. Like, I don't know, maybe they are going to win. Maybe it was did you externalize the insecurities or the pressure that you felt during that time to anyone?
Not massively. And that's not because I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. It's because I didn't really have anyone to talk to. I've always been very isolated. I've never had really any friends. I've got loads of acquaintances, loads of, I've got 3,000 Facebook friends, whatever that meaningless stuff means. But if in a time of crisis, if something really bad happens and I wanted to call someone, I honestly don't. Maybe there's one or two people that would be on the list, and that surprises people sometimes. And that's something I need to work on, I think, because that is something that I think everyone needs. And to be honest, I really still don't have that. If something awful happened tomorrow and I wanted to speak to someone, I wouldn't know who to call. I wouldn't have anyone to call. And I find doing the AA meetings, podcasts, even though you and me, we've never met, but I'm probably speaking to you more openly than I've spoken to anyone this year. And that's the honest truth, because I just don't have people to vent or to let go of sort of internal feelings. I do it quite often in AA meetings, and that is very useful. And that's kind of like what ticks me along and keeps me on a level playing field. But to really go deeper than that and to talk and to share on podcasts and things like that, I love doing. But to go back to your question, no, I didn't speak to anyone, not because I was ashamed or I didn't want anyone to think that I was feeling a certain way. I just didn't have anyone to speak to. I've always been like that, and I don't think it's going to change. Like, I never, looking back at my childhood, looking back at my time at university, I was always in my room. I've always had girlfriends. Like, and I don't know what that means. I've always had relationships that last and that's my main person. And historically, they do fizzle out. And yeah, it's interesting. Like, my last girlfriend made the point. She said, "Alex, do you have any friends?" Like, generally, she's like, "Do you have any friends? Like, you don't speak to anyone apart from me." And that was actually the first time it got highlighted to me that I don't have any friends. I speak to loads of people, but it's always in a professional manner. So yeah, I do find it hard to release the important stuff that if I don't release, it probably will end build up in me going to Tesco and buying a bottle of wine. So yeah, no, back to your question. No, I didn't speak to anyone, but just because for whatever reason, I didn't have anyone there.
And are you craving more of those relationships, or is it just that you just prefer being kind of, I don't know if the introverted is the right word, but more isolated? You just enjoy your own company?
I definitely prefer my own company, yeah. I've always been that way. I've tried to make friends. Like, that sounds really clinical. Over the years, I've had friends and they've come over we've made dinner, we've played Xbox, we've watched a movie. And I find I like the idea of it. I like the idea of having someone come over and socializing, but when it's actually happening, I want it to end. And that's obviously why. Like, I guess for whatever reason, I find maintaining friendships or actually socializing more of an effort than it gives me joy. But the drawback from that is, I don't have anyone to speak to. So yeah, definitely does have its disadvantage.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I heard on another podcast it was like the median number of people of men in the US people have to turn to in a time of crisis. It used to be like a handful of people, and now the median is like 0. Basically, it's not many people, and there's also a real epidemic of I think the government actually appointed like a loneliness director, or I can't remember what the phrase was, but it seems like community is one of the things that some people are really craving in this time, because I don't think a lot of men know who to turn to in a time of crisis. They've never been, I guess, taught to, or someone described it really well on a podcast recently. I think it was on Stephen Bartlett's, but the guy was basically saying girls have been almost, to make a generalization, girls have almost been practicing this. Take, for example, if a girl goes on a date, right? They're going to they're going to put it in their WhatsApp group. They're going to tell their friends. They're going to tell them who it is, what they're wearing, where they're going, all these details, and they're going to go on the date. They'll be texting throughout the date, and then when they finish the date, they'll get the update on WhatsApp, and they'll discuss it the next time they meet up. And it was, how are you feeling? How did he make you feel? What all those emotions? And then there's like, right, now picture guys, they'll be like, oh yeah, I went on a date 2 weeks ago, and then they'll ask, oh, how was it? And they went, yeah, it was all right, and then they just carry on. And yeah, it just feels like there's a lot of lost opportunity for guys to talk through their emotions and how they feel, to almost like let that pressure valve go. But yeah, thank you for telling the story and being so open. I really appreciate it.
No worries, Nick. No, I do enjoy talking about it.
Do you have any inclination into why there is such a I guess, men's mental health in particular crisis of the kind of significant issue that's seeming to go on with men in particular?
It's interesting. I mean, I guess we have to go back and ask ourselves what does it mean to be a man? And it would be interesting to ask 100 men what they think it is to be a man, what it means to be a man. I think we know what society potentially says it means to be a man. A man has to be a provider, a man has to be strong, a man has to be the breadwinner. And obviously that's not always true. I think what it means to be a man is you just need to be human. I think more people now are coming to terms with that, and men are vulnerable. You know, I've had first-hand experience of that. I tried to be strong and not show any weakness or vulnerability, and it nearly killed me twice. And as soon as I gave in to that, actually, you know, what is a man? It is so nuanced, and obviously we're all different. We've all got different strengths and weaknesses, and you just have to find out what yours is. And my weakness is I'm an alcoholic. In fact, that's not my weakness. That's a symptom of my weakness, which I don't really fully understand. There's something deep there that makes me want to drink. But I'm aware of it now. And I think self-awareness is so important. And I think actually that's, you know, having self-awareness makes you a bigger man than anyone else. I think that's so important.
Yeah, very well said. I think for me, it was I remember at university there was a time where I had I'm not an angry person at all, but there were times where I had a really short fuse and I didn't know why. I'd drink and then I'd get really angry, get into some fights, and I couldn't understand where it was coming from. And yeah, drinking was the only way that I guess I could not feel some of those emotions at times, and it brought out the worst. But it wasn't until I had therapy and they really dug down into what was the root cause of that. And once I was able to understand what it was, I was then able to go consciously, like, one, just I'd never spoken about that before. I'd never gone into the root cause and the issues. And then once I could understand it and have that self-awareness, as you said, that then I was in control of it. But before, it was just this anger and random emotions that would like well up in me, and I couldn't get control of it. So yeah, I think that's it's so true about self-awareness. One thing you said earlier, you said that there's now no shame about it. And one thing that I've been thinking recently is the campaigns are great. They're raising awareness, men's mental health. We know that's an issue. We know it's a topic. But how is this going to change the day-to-day conversation? Because I still think there is a lot of stigma around a guy. Like, I haven't heard a guy in an office go in and go, do you know, I'm just been feeling really anxious today. I've been having, and really go deep into emotions. I haven't heard it that much, but I've heard a lot of women in the workplace do that and be really open and vulnerable and about their emotions. And maybe that's a generalization.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There can be as much narrative and posts on LinkedIn or Facebook as you like, encouraging men to talk about their mental health. That can all happen. There's still going to be a huge amount of men, probably the vast majority of men, that don't want to do that and still will think it's a weakness. And it's such a huge stereotype that's been ingrained over such a long period of time. Maybe it's going to take longer than just a couple of years of social media narrative and general narrative going the other way to change it. And I don't know what the answer is. Unfortunately, I think there will be, again, probably most men that for some time still think that men shouldn't be vulnerable and men shouldn't speak out about various bits and bobs. I think it comes to the responsibility of people who have large audiences and influence and big organizations to carry on pushing the message out. Like, if you've got, I think everyone should be talking about it on social media. I think if you've got a big following, you've got a responsibility to talk about it. I mean, men have a 3 times higher suicide rate than women. And why is that? I think it's probably because of the reasons we've discussed just now. That clearly shows that all of the narrative isn't really having that much of an effect. I think if you've got an audience and you're not, it doesn't need to be all of your content, obviously, but I think everyone has a responsibility to keep pushing the narrative, and eventually we'll just chip away at the number of men who still look at it as a weakness and a vulnerability.
100%. I think because even a few people listening to this podcast have come up to me or spoken to me and said, and spoken about their mental health in a way that they've never had before. And as you said, for someone like yourself who speaks about it on LinkedIn, it's that ripple effect of if you help 10 people, that go then speak to their brother, their mother about their mental health. And those people go to their friends, family, and then it's just a continued ripple effect. The question I wanted to finish on is, I've seen you, like in a positive way, stick up for people or parts of society on LinkedIn, and you're really, it seems like you're really standing by your morals and your values. Why do you think that's important?
I think standing by your morals and your values is just generally important in just life in general. I mean, in my LinkedIn content, LinkedIn's great. I've only started using LinkedIn over the last 3 to 4 weeks, and it's honestly changed my life. It's given me an outlet to talk about things that I want to talk about. The opportunities that have come from it have been unbelievable. This podcast, obviously, I've been invited to the Houses of Parliament. I've been invited to Barcelona. There's about 10 things in about a month that have just come my way as a result of my LinkedIn content. I think at the moment, my content strategy is to push back against extreme narratives that are clearly damaging to mental health. I mean, there's some ridiculous narrative of extreme hustle culture, which is what I've been posting about a lot recently, which says you have to only sleep 4 hours a night and you have to run a marathon every day and you have to scale £1 billion business before you're 30, otherwise you're a failure. It's just such a toxic narrative that just seems to be all over TikTok and all over Instagram, and I'm pushing back against it. I'm saying it's ridiculous. Like, sleep 8 hours, like, just enjoy your 9 to 5. There's nothing wrong with that lifestyle. In fact, it's probably best for most people. Like, I don't think most people are built to be entrepreneurs, to be honest. Like, I think social media at the moment says you need to start a business. You need to be the next millionaire or the first millionaire in your family. Otherwise, you're a failure. And I think it's so damaging. So that's what I was going back to what I was saying earlier. People who have a following to call this stuff out. And the feedback I've had, like, I had one post 3 weeks ago that went absolutely viral. It got 74,000 likes, seen by 7 million people. 90% of the comments were praising the call out and saying, look, you're absolutely right to call this out. I had about 10% from like people who like to run a marathon every day, saying I should shut up. But yeah, so that's kind of my content strategy at the moment. It's to push back against this narrative, which is, I honestly think, making a lot of young people think that they're a failure because they don't wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and run 10K, or because they don't do a breathing technique, or they don't do yoga every morning. There's obviously bits of the hustle culture which are good. Like, I practice breathing techniques for my anxiety. I do a lot of running, but I'm calling out the extreme version of it, which is hugely damaging. And loads of young, particularly boys, I think, going back to the gender divide, think that that's what you need to do in order to be successful and in order to be a man. And I've clearly struck upon a nerve because the feedback has been tremendous. It's almost like people have just done a massive sigh of relief and thought, oh gosh, this is good. So that's not what I actually have to do in order to be successful. And yes, I'm hoping to do more of that style of content. I don't want to be the guy who talks about hustle culture all the time, and it gets quite boring. So I'm switching it up a bit, but that's kind of how I've made my introduction to LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, some of the best copywriting I've seen on LinkedIn is incredible. It's so easy to instantly understand what you're saying and understand the narrative, and that's why I think it's gone so viral. Is because you can, in instant understand exactly the narrative, and it's very entertaining at times on some of the posts, especially with some of the photos that you attach to the posts. Yeah, I think on that point, I know that friends have, and it's something that I'm guilty of, is seeing on LinkedIn, seeing some founder who's just scaled a business and looking at their instantly going to their LinkedIn profile and being like, oh God, they're only like 22. How have they already done that? They've already scaled a business. Or looking at someone in a similar role to me that they've done it 4 years earlier than I've done it. And it's, why is it that humans just obsess over the comparison and feel the need to do stuff earlier, bigger and better? It's, yeah. So that's part of the reason why we're speaking, is because I was inspired by the narrative that you were putting out and the story that you had to tell. That it's like, run your own race. At the end of the day, your happiness and you living your life and having good times with friends and family and being healthy and happy is what's important. It's not, you're not going to be sitting on your deathbed counting your money thinking, wow, I'm really glad I did that 5th ice bath this week.
No, you're definitely not. I mean, there are some people who, it's incredibly rare to scale and sell a multi-million pound business before you said 22, I'm going to say before you're 30. Incredibly rare. Like, you get a few, you're talking the top 1% of the top 1% who do it. So, and yeah, going back to what you said, like, the comparison really is the thief of joy. Stay in your lane, you versus you yesterday, all of that kind of cliche stuff, but it is true. But yeah, social media is a sucker for it. Like, it's so difficult as human beings. Like, we're not designed to have this field of comparison in the palm of our hands. Like, originally we're probably meant to have lived in small villages, and you probably only really compare yourself with Dave down the road who's a farmer, or he's grown a crop than me this year. But now we look at our phones and we compare ourselves with billions of people around the world. I don't know what the solution is. I think it's probably going to get worse. Just curate your newsfeed, like, be really conscious of who you're following. Understand that 95% of what's put out on social media is utter shit, utter nonsense. It's not true. Like, they've stood in front of a car that's probably not theirs. They've paid for that holiday on Klarna. Like, that Rolex is fake. Like, there's just so much nonsense and fakery out there, and unfortunately a lot of young people are probably comparing what they see to their reality, which is probably them, in bed with Dominoes in their PJs and thinking, oh man, I'm a failure because I'm not in the Maldives right now, or I haven't scaled a multi-million pound business before I'm 25. We just need to have a bit of a reality check. I think people are becoming aware now, which is good. I think a lot of people do know that what you see on Instagram and TikTok is complete rubbish and just like a complete facade and illusion and a load of fakery. But there's a whole generation of constantly people joining social media who don't know. So the cycle continues. But again, it's the responsibility of, I've been doing it, other people have been doing it, just calling it out. And you hope that you get the engagement. You hope that you craft the post in a way that it goes as viral as it can, so it gets as many eyeballs on it as possible. And then you hope that goes some way towards making people realize that 95% of what they see in their Instagram feed is bollocks.
Yeah, I actually even saw a post about a guy saying he used to have a Nissan and then he upgraded to a Porsche because he realized it got a higher click-through rate on his Facebook ads, and then he got more course sales off the back of that. And he was the ROI from getting the Porsche outweighed the cost of the lease increase. And I was like, what weird world are we living in? But genuinely, thank you so much for coming on and being so open and vulnerable, and really, really just taking people through the whole story and just how intense and how much pressure that you would have had on you during that time. And I've really enjoyed the podcast. So thank you.
Wow. Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate the invite. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Never Fully Heard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, just chuck it to a friend.